This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
South Sudan's president admits his government is to blame for delay in the implementation of the peace agreement. Political campaigning across Africa expected to be hit after Twitter bans political advertisements. And even as fighting in Libya slows down, Libyans are still living in anxiety and fear. Hello and welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Beatrice Marshall, live in Nairobi. Our correspondents are live on location across the continent to bring you up to speed on what's happening at this hour. In Uganda, Isabel Nakiria focuses on a new crisis. Isabel.
Tonight, Beatrice, environmentalists are raising the alarm over a crisis of too many refugees in northern Uganda, putting a strain on the environment. I have that report.
And in Nairobi, Penina Karibe with a special feature on drought in Kenya.
I've just come back, Beatrice, from Marsabit County in the country's northeast, where quite frankly, the weather is a paradox of heavy rains and drought.
Thank you both. We'll see you in just a moment. But first, Ramanyang joins me now with the latest in your business headlines. Rama.
That's right, Beatrice. Plenty coming up in business, including this. The African Development Bank's governors have approved a $115 billion capital injection. And Sudan agrees with the World Bank, the IMF and the AFDB on a roadmap to rehabilitate its economy. Now the details and the numbers from those stories and plenty more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, though, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Beatrice.
Rama, thank you. And we begin with some news on social media. Twitter will stop accepting political advertisements. That's according to the company's CEO, Jack Dorsey. Dorsey argues that political messages reach should be earned, and paying for reach removes that decision. The company insists its decision was based on principle and not money. It made less than $3 million from political advertisements in the 2018 cycle. The announcement comes amid intense scrutiny of Silicon Valley's handling of political ads. His comment also puts him at odds with senior Facebook executives who have vigorously defended their policy of not fact-checking political advertisements. U.S. President Donald Trump spent the most on digital ads in the 2020 election. His official for his campaign has been quick to respond that the move will have little effect on his re-election campaign. The decision by social media platform Twitter to ban political advertisements has brought on a debate about the implications for free speech and political campaigns. CGTN's Wilkisa Nyabwa spoke to an analyst on digital technologies about what the ban could mean for African nations.
Twitter's announcement of a ban on political advertisements came just an hour before Facebook's founder, Mark Zuckerberg, was scheduled to hold a press conference, a move which experts believe was timed to exert pressure on Facebook to do the same. But Facebook continues to stand by its decision to run unchecked political ads. Both decisions could have widespread political ramifications. At least 20 African nations were set to go to the polls in 2019. Social media played a vital role in many of these campaigns.
Political advertising is a big thing in countries in Africa and throughout Africa at large. But what we've seen in the past is that a lot of the political advertising, the paid for political advertising, is coming from places overseas.
On Wednesday, Facebook made a startling revelation. The social media giant said that it had removed 3 Russian-backed networks on its site that targeted African countries including Mozambique, Cameroon, Sudan and Libya. The company said the online networks belonged to a Russian businessman accused of interfering in the American presidential elections in 2016. The impact of this recent campaign is unclear, but Facebook's reluctance to ban political ads could have a great impact in future campaigns.
A lot of the forms of political advertising that happen in countries in Africa online tend to be less formal, not paid for. It's spread by the people.
Facebook remains a popular site in Africa, with 11.9% of the population having access to it. With or without a ban on political ads, social media scientists argue that there is a need to monitor content to protect social media users from highly targeted, potentially misleading messages. Wilkisa Nyabwa, CGTN.
South Sudan's President Salva Kiir says that his government takes a full responsibility for the delay in implementing last year's peace deal. He explains that the process is slow because his government lacks the necessary funds to carry out the stipulated reforms. President Kiir says the best option for the country now is for all parties to the peace deal to adhere to the November 12th deadline in forming a unity government. But opposition leader Riek Machar has threatened not to join the new government unless the security sector reforms are completed. He is asking for an extension of another 6 months. Let's get more on that situation in South Sudan. I'm joined by CGTN's Patrick Oyet. He's in the capital, Juba. Patrick, with just 10 days to the scheduled formation of a unity government, at what stage is the peace implementation process?
Yes, the peace implementation process here is divided, first of all, into three. There's the pre-interim period where, the parties are supposed to arrange everything ready for the formation of the government, including stopping fighting, stopping attacking each other in the media. And then the second stage is the interim period, which we are left with 10 days now to actually enter, such that the government is formed, they implement the peace deal, and then after that, elections are to take place, and then they exit to a new political dispensation in the country. Now, the fear many here are having is that the parties are not yet agreeing, especially the government led by President Salva Kiir and, of course, the opposition group led by designated Vice President Riek Machar. Now, the disagreement majorly is on the security sector reforms. President Salva Kiir has said, yes, there has been slow progress, and that is because he doesn't have the money to actually reform the security sector. But he is saying if the government is formed now, then perhaps they will get money, because now all members of the international community, international donors are saying they cannot actually put in their money unless they're sure that peace will be sustained in the country. So President Salva Kiir's group is saying if we form a government now, then there could be, international goodwill from the international community that will make that money to come, and then reforms could be done. They are arguing that even though the security sector reforms have been slow, but the biggest achievement of the peace deal for now is the security sector itself, because they're saying the guns have gone silent, people are moving, aid is reaching people, and of course the army are in the camps, even though with challenges. So they're saying if the government is formed and now money comes in, then they can move the process forward. Meanwhile, opposition leader Riek Machar is saying, if he joins the government now, then there is a possibility that the reforms that he is asking for may not actually take place. And he fears, and some people say, yes, he has a reason to fear, because he was here in 2016. Fighting broke out here. He was one of the people who suffered a lot because of that fighting. So what now people are expecting in Juba and South Sudan as a whole is that if these two groups don't agree by early next week, then the East African Regional Body, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, should convene a meeting where all the parties to the peace deal are supposed to be brought together so that they find a way forward. That is the situation here.
All right, Patrick Oyet joining us there from Juba. Thank you. Well, environmental campaigners are warning Africa's biggest refugee settlement could be the cause of an environmental disaster in northern Uganda. CGTN's Isabel Nakiria is following up on this. Isabel, a crisis on Uganda's hands. Can you tell us more?
Yes, Beatrice, over 250,000 refugees living in Bidibidi settlement in northern Uganda, where the crisis of wood fuel and construction material is causing deforestation. The Ministry of Disaster estimates over 58% of trees have been lost in the last decade. Take a look at my report. Cutting down on harm to the environment. Salama Chandiru and her group are using dry corn stalks to produce renewable energy. It's part of efforts to help communities at Bidibidi refugee settlement to adopt energy-efficient means for cooking rather than wood fuel.
After harvesting the maize, we just go and collect the rubbish. After collecting, then we carried it, then we burn. After burning, We mix, after mixing then we start making the briquette.
Refugee communities at the settlement are now getting the briquette blocks in exchange for dry corn stalks. And efforts to increase on sustainable energy resources like salamas are beginning to pay off.
After we started making the bricks, the issue of cutting trees, I'm seeing it's not like the one of last year. It is now improving. People have started using the brickages.
The UN Refugee Agency estimates each refugee at Bidi settlement cuts down around 20 trees annually. All that's left of this expanse of land are tree stumps. There used to be a forest, but since trees were cut down for wood fuel, there has been no new trees planted. UNHCR says it has also started a campaign to plant more trees in the settlement.
The mobilization capacity, I think we're getting there. It doesn't happen overnight. So we have the partners now, we have the capacity, we have an agreement with the National Forest Authority. So all this is taking place, but it's a resource issue. Environment, as far as the refugee response program plan is concerned, is only funded at 13%.
But the journey to end the use of wood for fuel could still be long. For now, Salama and her group say they will continue pushing for renewable energy solutions with the hope of stopping the cutting down of trees for cooking. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Yumbe, northern Uganda.
So, Isabel, it's a rather delicate situation if there are no alternatives. 58% of trees having been destroyed in the last decade. What are the alternatives for the authorities, though, and the refugees if the situation is to be salvaged?
Beatrice, a couple of mitigation measures are being put in place. UNHCR, that is the refugee agency here, is trying to put in a number of steps to try and mitigate the effects of deforestation. They say that 2.3 million trees has so far been planted. The agency hopes to plant over 20 million trees in the coming months or years or so. They also say that they plan to distribute energy-saving stoves to communities in the refugee agencies. From my report, you have seen some communities are learning how to make briquettes. That is an energy solution that can save the environment instead of cutting down wood fuel. And with that, they hope that communities will adopt these measures and stop cutting down trees. Back to you, Beatrice.
Isabel Nakiria joining us there from Kampala. Thank you.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Let's go to Libya now, where active fighting between rebels aligned to the Eastern Commander Khalifa Haftar and government forces has reduced in recent weeks. But as CGTN's Penina Karibe reports, locals are calling for an end to the battle for Tripoli as combatants seek to keep to their front lines.
It is almost 7 months since the war for Tripoli began. Eastern Commander Khalifa Haftar launched an armed push for the city as he sought to entrench his influence on the Libyan capital and nationally. It is a conflict that has attracted international players, with some foreign countries supporting either side in the conflict. Now the guns have largely gone silent, an armed deadlock, and the effects of the violence are clearly evident. It is just a lull before yet another storm. Thus, front lines must be maintained. Hence, combatants are on the lookout for any presence of enemy fire. For the players, peace seems to be the end game.
We're definitely against this war. This war will leave behind major problems for Libyans, whether socially, economically, and on all other levels.
Once in a while, locals stream out in search of their daily supplies, amid uncertainty of what lies ahead. but the feeling of abandonment is real.
The world has given up on the government of national accord. We mean the international community and influential powers which established the Presidential Council and the GNA. But they have given up on us in front of this invasion.
So far, Commander Khalifa Haftar has indicated his willingness to engage in dialogue with his nemesis, but only if the city is cleared of armed groups that have been fighting alongside government troops. The government on its part says a ceasefire can only happen if and when Haftar withdraws his troops to his eastern position. Scores of local civilians have been killed and thousands of others displaced. Some have sought refuge in the neighboring Tunisia. Since Muammar Gaddafi was overthrown and later killed in 2011, Libya has known little peace. The latest conflict adds another sting to an already painful situation in Libya. The North African nation was already grappling with armed militias, the rise of ISIL and Al-Qaeda networks, together with the stubborn migrant crisis. Penina Karibe, CGTN.
You're watching Africa Live on CGTN. Still ahead on the program.
South Africa and Angola meet to consider the African Union peace efforts. I have those details for you next.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines.
You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca, among the crowds in Cairo,
who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Kenya is just coming out of a dry season which has severely affected the country's food and water reserves. CGTN's Penina Karibe is with us tonight after spending the week in the county of Marsabit in northern Kenya. Penina, you have been in northern Kenya in Marsabit County. What is the situation there?
Well, Beatrice, I can tell you the drought has severely hit most parts of the country and the northeast especially. Now, just a few months ago, the Marsabit County government desperately appealed for humanitarian assistance as 90% of its water reserves dried up. Now it's raining heavily in that county. But as I've discovered, despite these heavy rains, water scarcity is still a huge issue. Let's take a look.
The morning mist envelops the free Marsabit town. It is just after 9, and this is what the town and its environs have been waking up to for the past 1 month. Kenya's been blanketed in its seasonal short rains, but in Marsabit, the rains have been unusually heavy. Floods and loss of property are the end result. A few kilometers away, the reality is quite different. We're in the heart of Marsabit County and smack in the middle of the rainy season. Now, looking around me, there's not much from the landscape that lets you know this county is currently experiencing rains, and that's because of two deserts, Kaisut and Chalbi. Chalbi is the largest. It occupies 100,000 square kilometers of Marsabit County. It is the hottest and most arid region in Kenya. Now, usually, people from this region will only ask you for one thing, water. It is a rare and precious commodity. In Lekuchula village, the search for water is an entire day's business. Here, they've simply just experienced light drizzles. No one is spared from the hunt for water, not even the little ones. They spend the day dragging such jerrycans fully loaded with water. For a community that is heavily dependent on their livestock for economic survival, this means walking long distances, sometimes even living away from their homes for months just to keep their animals alive. So, what makes this county such a weather paradox?
We have different types of zones. There is a zone 1, zone 2, zone 3. Zone 1, those regions which are very low, and normally they are hot. We have, in fact, a Chalbi desert in that region. So this region normally get annual rainfall ranging from 80 to 300.
And then there's the highlands area like Marsabit town, which receive fairly good rainfall. However, most of that water is not captured and stored, leaving the county once again with severe water scarcity. The county government has been building dams and distributing water tanks to help in water catchment, but it admits more can be done.
The kind of resources that we have as a county are hardly enough. If we had good resources, we will be able to do large dams.
To supplement its efforts, some local non-governmental organizations have joined in, building water tanks and also taking advantage of the many rocks in the county to use them as water catchment areas such as this one.
We used to go fetch water very far. We'd go in the morning at 6 and leave the children at home. You get there and find that the watering hole for all the animals and the water was very dirty. We'd get back home at 3 hours later.
We realized this would be a better strategy for us because initially it was a small pond. And we decided to cover it completely, build a wall and cleared the sand and made it much deeper for it to contain a lot of water. This is something that's going to last them for quite a very long time.
From time to time, the organization distributes clean water to the villagers, and when the water arrives, it is literally a scramble.
We've gotten messages from villages and that they don't even have water to cook food. And if they get water to cook food, they will have to walk about 14 kilometers to access it. They go to a nearby borehole and it's salty water, so it takes a long time to cook food, but also it's not good for human consumption.
They may seem like small steps, but they are steady steps to making sure the county becomes water sufficient. And for now, these efforts are the difference between life and death for such villagers. Penina Karibe, CGTN in Marsabit, Kenya.
So, Penina, climate change is a reality in most parts of the African continent. How are the neighboring counties in Kenya faring? Is the situation replicated elsewhere in the region?
Well, yes, it is, Beatrice. When you look at that whole region, some parts of eastern Kenya, northeastern Kenya, like Marsabit, northern Kenya, these are generally arid and semi-arid regions, Beatrice. They're very dry most of the year. Now, we understand from the meteorological department that a lot of these areas don't really receive a lot of rainfall, even as other parts of the country do. However, when they do receive that rainfall, and I'll take you back to that story, when I mentioned they are receiving heavy rains right now, that's not being seen across the country. But when that happens, they collect the water from the Ethiopian highlands, because you know Ethiopia borders Kenya on that region, and a lot of this water is washed away. And the biggest challenge, Beatrice, in that region is generally resources. You speak to the government officials there and they say they don't really have the resources to engage in water catchment areas. And that's generally because they say that they're not very well funded, and also because of the size, just the sheer size of some of these counties, very big counties and with very sparse populations. They're also not able to reach a lot of these communities. Now, the other challenge, of course, has to do with the fact that they're pastoralists. They move from time to time in search of pasture and water for their livestock. And so the government officials were explaining that even when they decide they want to do a water catchment project in a particular place, then they're not able to do it because then they find that the communities there have moved. So it's a picture that's replicated across, but then the county government saying it is hopeful that going forward, the national government will see the need to invest more in such kind of efforts, Beatrice.
Penina Karibe for us there on the drought situation in northern Kenya. Thank you. Tension is simmering in Ghana as local traders in the second largest city, Kumasi, lock up shops belonging to foreigners, especially those of Nigerian nationals. The local business owners are saying that their action is to compel the government to restrict foreigners from engaging in the retail sector. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports.
The closure of shops of some Nigerian traders took place in the Ashanti regional capital, Kumasi. Ghanaian traders engaged in retail business say they are being pushed out of business by Nigerians who sell cheap products on the market.
Because of the way and manner they have trooped into the retail business, they are now occupying a lot of shops in the business community. And for that matter, they are dictating, the cost at which the shops must be sold.
This is not the first time Ghanaian traders are resorting to the closure of shops of foreigners, especially Nigerians. In June this year, traders in Accra also locked up shops of their Nigerian counterparts to push authorities to enforce the country's laws that prevent foreigners from engaging in retail business.
We are not driving any foreigner away, but what we are saying is that the laws of the country must be enforced so that if they want to be in business with us, no problem. We are not worried about that, but they must, be in their lane.
The trade tension with Nigerians comes barely 3 months after Nigeria closed its border in Benin to prevent the import of goods from Ghana and other West African nations. However, Ghanaian traders say this action has nothing to do with the closure of the Nigerian border in Benin. Meanwhile, Ghana's government has asked for calm amongst both Nigerian and Ghanaian traders as it works to find lasting solution to the situation. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
The head of South Africa's army has been hosting his Angolan counterpart in the capital, Pretoria. The two military leaders are deliberating on army-to-army issues of interest, as well as on AU efforts for peace and stability. CGTN's Elisa Njamela has more.
Relations between South Africa and Angola were quite tense in the past. But post the South African Democratic Dispensation, the tensions eased a bit. Diplomatic ties between the two countries began taking shape in the year 2000. That's when an agreement establishing economic, scientific, cultural and social collaboration led to the foundation of the South Africa-Angola Joint Commission for Cooperation. In recent years, the two countries have grown closer and even collaborate on a number of social and economic ventures. The armed forces or the military are part of those collaborations. The mission of this gathering is to consider the two armies' roles in the African Union peace efforts.
Military, as much as it is about ensuring peace and security of own people, it does that as well through partnerships, not only with societal organizations, but with institutions of learning, with defense industry, concentrating on research and development. And as a region, we are a region that comes from the history of the frontline states, grouped now in SADC, which also has got a responsibility as a region on the African standby force.
In order to preserve solid military relations between the African Union member states, the South African Army makes a sensible effort to involve fellow African militaries, to share best practices and help chart a way forward for close cooperation that would ensure that initiatives for the maintenance for continental peace and security in Africa is achieved.
We are in a good way in terms of cooperation, mainly in planning field. There is communication between the two armies. 2 weeks ago, there was an exchange of experience. Some South African students went to Angola. There is a lot of interest. We belong to the same continent and we share the same objectives. So, we just have to keep on in that field of cooperation.
The visit is also aimed at strengthening bilateral ties between the two armies and also sharing ideas pertaining cutting-edge defense technology.
This is meant to strengthen that umbilical cord which has got history, that has moved from war and now friendship.
Both armies are keen to ensure that best practices are employed by their respective defense industries. Yodison Jamela for C2TN in Pretoria, South Africa.
Zimbabwe's capital, Harare, is popularly known as the Sunshine City, but it has a lot more to offer than that bright weather. Wildlife, art and craft, together with welcoming residents, make it a must-visit attraction for foreign tourists. And the place to be for opportunity-seeking locals. Here's CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya.
Impressive architecture, wide streets, aging but still solid infrastructure, and plenty of sunshine. This is Harare in all its splendor. Despite the economic challenges, this city remains vibrant and its people resilient.
People here are serious, people are hustling, people are looking for money, people are looking for ways to make ends meet. They don't just sit and cry about financial problems, social problems, or political problems, but actually think of how to thrive and make a living out of it.
Many have sought opportunities in informal trade, vending anything from food to clothing and gadgets, while others have carved out a niche, making use of materials readily available within their city.
Art is one of the pillars, in terms of economic empowerment, because it brings in tourists, it brings in employment, it brings in foreign currency as well. When you talk of someone coming from, let's say the United Kingdom, it's their first time to see something that is made out of a hand. Then it beautifies the city, it beautifies the whole country. So because we have got colorful stones, we have got colorful designs and prints as well. So it just adds the flavor to the city as well.
You don't have to travel far to see other tourist attractions.
We also have a couple of sanctuaries that are taking care of this wildlife in an effort to obviously address the conservation issue. It had to be closer to the people so that they can see the benefits.
But there's more to Harare than game and high rises.
It's one of the safest cities. You can walk at any time without being troubled, really. I think the second most amazing thing about it is the people. People are very hospitable, very loving, fun-loving as well, engaging, and they'll go out of their way really to take good care of you.
This is the vantage point from which you can take in the city that many believe, because of the current setbacks, is a sleeping giant.
But from the industry of its people, which you can see even from up here, it will awaken very soon. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
And Ramanyang is joining us now with a look at the day's business news. Rama.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up in business. The African Development Bank's board has approved a $115 billion capital injection. And Sudan agrees with multilateral institutions, the World Bank, the IMF and AFDB, on a roadmap to rehabilitate its economy.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's start in the world of development finance. The African Development Bank's Board of Governors has approved a $115 billion capital injection that will see the Pan-African lender's capital base jump from just under $93 billion to over $208 billion. That decision was made this week at an extraordinary meeting in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. The new funding will be the largest in the bank's 55-year history. It will ensure that its current AAA rating from ratings agencies is maintained. The bank's president, Akinwumi Adesina, said that he would channel the funds into infrastructure, regional integration, climate change and supporting fragile states to build resilience and boost private sector investment. Now, the bank has also plans in the pipeline to pump more money into infrastructure projects that will address electricity connectivity and improve energy access, transport, water, sanitation services as well in several African countries. Over to South Africa now. The seasonally adjusted ABSA PMI continued to contract in October despite improvements in business activity and new sales orders. The index, which gauges manufacturing activity in Africa's most industrialized economy, rose to 48.1 points in October from a revised 45.1 in the previous month. but it's still below the 50-point mark that separates expansion from contraction. Now, ABSA says that the business activity index increased after 2 consecutive declines, while new sales orders also improved a little bit from a sharp drop in September. But both indices, again, still under that 50-point mark, pointing to a decline in demand and in output as well. Well, still in South Africa, where Taste Holdings, that's the owner of the Starbucks and Domino's Pizza franchises in the country, has announced that it will be abandoning the food business. Now, the company has already sold 13 stores of the coffee chain to a consortium for about $464,000. It says it is also in talks around the sale of Domino's and its 2 other food businesses, the restaurant chain Maxis and the fish and chips company. That decision is part of a new strategy to become a solely luxury retail group, including jewelers Arthur Kaplan and world's finest watches. Taste is one of a string of retail firms that have been hurt by a stagnant economy and unemployment that is just under 30%. Rising living costs have also left many a South African household with little cash to spare. Tanzania and Zambia are in talks at the moment to review the Tanzania-Zambia Railway Authority Act and the restructuring of the decades-old Tazara rail line. Both countries hope that improvements will encourage investment and make the line more profitable. Here's GTN's Daniel Kijo with more.
For 44 years, this railway line has been an important link between Dar es Salaam in Tanzania and Kapirimposhi in Zambia. It was built in the early 1970s by China as a gift to both countries. And according to the railway, the single-track line that runs 1,860 kilometers has served more than 50 million people and transported over 28 million tons of cargo. But its usage has declined amid rising competition from road and air transport. The railway operator wants to bring back the line to its glory days.
For us to move to the levels where we want to be, we need to do what President John Magufuli wants us to do: recapitalize the organization, give it sufficient funds for it to purchase enough locomotives, enough wagons, put in the signaling system so that it is working.
Transport ministers from Zambia and Tanzania are finalizing an agreement to make changes to the Tanzania-Zambia Railway Authority Act, which governs its operations. The management hopes that new policies will make sure that at least 30% of the country's bulk cargo is transported by rail. The leaders of the 2 states say the railway board will complete a business plan by March 2020. At the moment, the board is making a loss. To break even, the line will need to carry 600,000 tons of freight annually. Tazara management says currently the line is transporting over 24,000 tons annually using only 8 locomotives. Ramadhani Ndunda has been using the train since 1975. He says the train used to have more frequent trips, something he wishes to see again.
Improvements need to be done because back in 1975, when this transport started, we used to be able to travel thrice a week.
According to Tazara, 35 cargo wagons can transport the equivalent of 50 trucks, making it a cheaper and faster way of transporting bulk cargo.
As Tazara, we should be paying dividends to both Zambia and Tanzania. We should be paying dividends. We should not be receiving money from government. We should be paying dividends. We can do it.
Both countries are hoping that the revamp of this important train route will strengthen not only their political ties, but also their economies. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
On to Sudan now. The authorities there have agreed with the World Bank, the IMF and the African Development Bank on a roadmap to rehabilitate its economy. That at least is according to the country's finance minister, Ibrahim El Badawi, who just flew back from Washington, D.C., where he was attending the annual meetings of the World Bank and the IMF. Now, the plan will involve a range of structural reforms and a debt relief program, which ideally should start by the end of 2020. He also said the ministry submitted financing requests for 20 projects to a range of donors. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have already given Sudan $3 billion in aid. The country's new transitional government, which was formed as part of a 3-year deal agreed to by military and civilian leaders back in August, has been working to remove Sudan from the United States sponsors of terrorism list to potentially open the door for foreign investment to start flowing back into the country. Bit of company news now. In Kenya, the telecommunications operator Safaricom announced a 12.7% rise in earnings before interest and taxes to $482 million in the first half of the year ending in September. The company is partly owned by South Africa's Vodacom and Britain's Vodafone. Management attributed the growth to increased revenue from its mobile financial service M-Pesa and its internet access division. The acting CEO, Michael Joseph, says that the company will focus on investment and improving the quality of service to increase their market share. The company is also hoping to replicate its Kenyan success in Ethiopia, where it plans to bid for one of 2 Ethiopian telecoms licenses next year in partnership with South Africa's Vodacom. One final story for you. Roughly 3 out of every 4 families here in Kenya depend on wood fuel or charcoal to cook their daily meals. However, using these fuels are known to come with a whole host of costs. Indoor pollution is just the least of your problems. You've got healthcare problems for years that do follow. CGTN's Wilkis Nyabwa now explores how Kenya's Lake Victoria region is turning what once used to be the world's worst aquatic weed into biofuel.
The crisp, fresh fish fried to perfection is one of the attractions of Dunga Beach in Kisumu County. But lately, the food stalls are not the only structures on these shores. These little stalls covered in plastic are changing the way the fisher folk at the beach work. This is a biodigester. It works like a stomach. Organic waste goes in one end, ferments, and gives off gas and liquid fertilizer, which comes out of the other end. The women use the biogas produced to cook their fish. This is a brainchild of Dominic Wanji here.
So we came here and I noticed the women over here cooking on firewood. And I was like, that cannot be healthy every single day, and it's smoky like crazy.
Dominic also noticed that the water hyacinth plant was spreading further, making it harder for fishermen to access the lake. So he came up with an idea to solve both problems. He installed 2 massive biodigesters at the beach. He uses water hyacinth and other organic waste from around the lake.
So they started giving us the offals, and then the restaurants, we told them, give us your garbage as well. And so all of the organic waste that the beach generates ends up in the biogas digesters.
The digesters turn this into about 25,000 liters of gas daily. The women then pay 50 US cents per hour to cook their fish on the biogas stoves. It's cheaper than the firewood they are accustomed to.
Firewood is so hard to use, and we have to get it from far. We have to pay to buy it and then to transport it, so it isn't cheap.
Using solid fuels like this for cooking also increases indoor pollution. The World Health Organization estimates that about 14,000 Kenyans lose their lives annually owing to indoor air pollution, a problem that this biogas project hopes to resolve, but it isn't the only problem that it is looking to address. The Kisumu County government is now considering installing the digesters to help the city get rid of organic waste.
About 63% of the waste that we have is organic. And this organic can be put in better use through adopting sustainable technologies to harness it into energy instead of just having it wasted outside there.
And there are 50 more biodigesters in homesteads around the beach. These efforts may seem like a drop in a massive lake, but they are bolstering efforts to ensure there's no waste, as it is all reduced, reused, or recycled. Wilkis Nyabwa, CGTN.
And that's all for business at this point in time. Back to Beatrice.
Rama, thank you. And we still have more news for you on the program. Here's what's ahead.
They bed and break bread with demons under the sun. They build homes beneath broken skies.
One of Africa's biggest poetry festivals kicks off in Lagos, Nigeria.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
One of Africa's biggest poetry festivals is underway in Lagos, Nigeria. The Lagos International Poetry Festival, which runs for 4 days, features poets and writers from across Africa and Europe. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus.
We are dodging death every evening.
Beatrice Marshall is one of over 50 poets and writers headlining the 2019 Lagos International Poetry Festival.
Why won't you wake up?
For this 23-year-old, this form of literature is more than wordplay and rhymes. It's a means of conveying a powerful message and correcting ills in her society.
What I want to do with my poetry, I want to build language where I don't have language, for the things I don't have language for. Like if I want to talk about shame and I don't know what shame looks like, I use images for that because words are not enough. So what I do with my poetry, I want to paint, I want to color, I want people to be able to see the things I'm talking about, not just hear them.
Because the road is flooded.
Unlike Beatrice, who traveled all the way from South Africa and is a first timer on this stage, Chika Jones, a Nigerian, is a more familiar face at this poetry festival. The part-time poet and digital marketer uses his poems to highlight diverse issues in Nigeria, covering several subjects.
I have a couple of themes that are pretty constant in my poetry. Violence against women, I talk about that a lot. The Biafran War, I talk about that a lot. Then there are also some smaller themes, like rain, like love. I talk about those things too. So it depends on what I'm thinking about and what I feel is important for people to know.
The festival is the brainchild of Nigerian poet and literary artist Efe Paul Azino. After years of sharing his poems on stages across the world, he sought a way to get other literary minds to do the same. He then came up with this festival, which goes beyond stage presentations.
We started in 2015 because at the time there was basically a flowering or a resurgence, of poetry, of literature, and of the arts generally, particularly on the global stage. We had, Nigerian artists doing amazing things all across the world. And we wanted to create a platform, to celebrate that in Lagos. And poetry particularly because it's been a fantastic time for poetry, across the continent. Almost every city you go to, you can find an open mic spot where, young people particularly gather to, to vent, to express themselves, to address the issues that affect them as they see them. And we thought it would be interesting to create, a global platform to celebrate that.
You know the women of whom I speak. They bed and break bread with demons under the sun.
Nigeria is home to some of the most popular names in African literature, but the art of poetry seems to be on the decline, with fewer people taking to the art. Organizers of this event say the festival is projected to help change the narrative and get more people to appreciate poetry.
So we're looking at having a Young Writers and Creators Lab where we bring established writers and authors from across the world, in touch with younger people who are basically trying to find their own voice.
Often considered the oldest form of literature, poetry has been used to shape thoughts and reflect culture. The Lagos International Poetry Festival will wind down with an exchange program involving poets from Nigeria, South Africa and the United Kingdom. This, the organizers say, will help bridge racial gaps and minimize differences in dialogues. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
And we have more news coming up for you, including...
In sports, South Africa faces familiar foe England in a repeat of the 2007 Rugby World Cup final in a hunt for a third William Webb-Ellis trophy.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
New Zealand marked a 40-17 victory over Wales to clinch the third-place playoff at the Rugby World Cup at the Tokyo Stadium on Friday, while also bidding farewell to coach